Well, hello and welcome to another edition of Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham, where Team Needham discusses everything healthcare. I am your host, Shawn Needham, along with my wonderful wife, Janet, and our producer, Lindsay, and we are streaming live at the Moses Lake Professional Pharmacy Studio in Moses Lake, Washington. Excited for you guys to be here, as always, streaming live on my personal Facebook page from 1 to 2 p.m. every Monday, and our midweek podcast usually streams on my Facebook page and on YouTube at every Thursday, 8 to 9 a.m. So please tune in there. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. The Moses Lake Professional Pharmacy YouTube channel is where we stream live. Please subscribe to that. And comment. Let us know if you'd like to, what other subjects you'd like to hear about. So we really appreciate it. And I read all the comments myself personally. So also on all the podcast forums, so SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, all those podcast forums we are available on. This episode will be available either tomorrow or the next day. Usually within a few days, we're live on those podcast forums. So go to those podcast forums, your favorite podcast forums, and listen there also. So those of you that follow me on social media probably know about my book, Sickened, How the Government Ruined Healthcare and How to Fix It. And about a year ago, I released the book that 20 years in making, 5 years in the writing. And I released the book on Kindle, Amazon, and my goal this year was to release the book in paperback version. So that means it'll be available on Amazon. It'll be available on at Barnes & Noble, other bookstores. And I'm super excited to show you that, let's see, that here is the first copy of my book. If you look, this one is not for resale because it is my proofread copy. I'm proofreading it as we speak. And once I proof it and get it all edited, it will be available on Amazon, paperback version. So go to Amazon. It'll be available on Barnes & Noble. Stay tuned. It's not quite available yet, but we will update you here on our podcast to let you know when it is available. And also, it'll be available in audiobook form. I just got done recording that a couple weeks ago. It is in my voice. What a better way to write my book than to also read my book, and in my voice with my exclamation. So it's going to be in available in paperback and audio. So be watching out for that. We'll let you know. It's going to be available for the end of the year. We're hoping for a Christmas release, so it'd be a great Christmas present. So with that, I want to introduce our guest today. His name is Sam Tran, and he's going to talk a little bit more about his history. But one of the things that really intrigued me about Sam is he left Big Pharma. And if you guys don't know what Big Pharma is, I know we kick that word around some on this podcast, but Big Pharma is big pharmaceutical companies. And really what they are is they're big companies that the FDA has approved, basically. And these big pharma controls a lot of our healthcare. When I say that, Big Pharma is in collusion with a lot of insurance companies. So why are drugs expensive? You should ask Big Pharma that. You should ask insurance companies that, because they are in collusion together to keep drugs expensive. And so when drugs go generic, those drugs stop being marketed, and Big Pharma thinks of a crazy way to change the drug and then patent it and charge $1,000 more a month. So, and those are some things that we're going to be discussing more in detail today about how Big Pharma got created, because Sam is from the industry and he left it because he didn't feel that Big Pharma served the interest of the public very well. So Sam, without further ado, go ahead and tell me a little bit about your history.
Yeah, well, thank you, Shawn and Janet, for having me on here. This is a great forum for us to exchange these type of ideas. I got into healthcare. Well, when I was younger, my grandma had a stroke when I was a teenager, and that kind of cemented in my mind that I wanted to go into healthcare because I didn't want any other person to experience that crisis or that tragedy in their family. And at the time I was actually supposed to become a dentist because my older brother's a dentist, but I decided I didn't want to work with blood and teeth all day, inside someone's mouth. So I was always a tinkerer. I took apart tools and knew how to work on cars with my dad. And so I went into laboratory medicine because there's a lot of automation and robotics and things like that. So I studied at the University of Washington in medical technology.
Go Huskies.
What's that?
Go Huskies.
Yeah, go Huskies.
I'm a Husky myself.
Oh, there you go. We'll have to catch a game together when they finally allow us to go watch games together.
Right, yes.
Yeah. So yeah, I worked at the University of Washington Medical Center for a number of years and kind of saw the revolving door that is our healthcare system. People show up for their clinics or show up for their appointments, and they get a little better. They go home, they get sick again, and they come back week after week. And you start to recognize the names on the blood tubes and things like that. And so I said, there's got to be a better way, because this is not sustainable. And so at that time, I think it was back in the late 1990s. That's when I went into cancer research, went into pharmaceutical research, thinking that I was going to be a part of some big discovery and race for the cure, find the cure, and all those things. But after being in the career for over 20 years, it just dawned on me that we're not going to cure anything. Cures are actually illegal, which is, if you say you cure something, the FDA is going to come in and shut you down. And so it's very ironic. And so,
wow.
And so it's, I just saw, and ironically, I ended up working I ran the clinical pathology laboratory at Amgen, which they make Epogen and Neupogen, a lot of cancer support therapies. And my department was part of toxicology. So we were charged with looking at the side effects profile of all the drugs on the blood work, the hematology, the clinical chemistry profile. And after a while, I said, man, can you guys make something that's non-toxic? just one thing that's non-toxic. And that's when it dawned on me that we don't make anything. Everything we make is toxic. So it was kind of like an eye-opening realization of what I was really a part of. And yeah.
So tell us a little bit about how old is Big Pharma? We think that. I guess just tell us a little bit of history of Big Pharma. You know about that personally. Tell us a little bit of history about Big Pharma and how it got started.
Yeah, so actually Big Pharma is only about 110 years old, somewhere around there. For the longest time, there was a allopathic, homeopathic type of medicine, right? People using roots and herbs and leaves and tinctures and things like that. That's gone on for thousands of years, whether it's Ayurvedic medicine or Chinese medicine or Native American, medicine men, right? And so that's gone on for forever. And so with the discovery of crude oil by the Rockefeller family, well, actually, they didn't really discover that. They just cornered the market.
Right. Yeah.
And then they did the same thing, because the Rockefeller family, Standard Oil was actually broken up by the U.S. government. For being like a
monopoly.
A monopoly.
Right. The Sherman Antitrust Act in the 1890s.
Yeah. Exactly. So that's when they diversified their portfolio and went into other different fields, and healthcare was one of those fields. And so the application there was, how can we apply crude oil to healthcare? And so, but it started with, John D. Rockefeller and funding a lot of schools, funding a lot of research, because at that time, Western medicine was the new kid on the block. No one wanted to use, toxic chemicals. They wanted to use, herbs and tinctures and flowers and roots and things like that have been time tested. And so they had to support all this research. And for me, it was quite interesting, because you look into the history of the Rockefellers, and it all makes a lot of sense. His dad, William Avery Rockefeller, was literally a snake oil salesman, literally. So, and I don't know and I looked into the history of snake oil. So when they were building the railroads over here in the U.S. back in the late, I think 1800s. There was a lot of Chinese workers, right, building the railroads. And so they would use they would use snake oil, literally from, I think it was green river snakes or something that had some anti-inflammatory effects. And then some savvy businessmen said, hey, we could sell the same thing by using, some other kind of oil, but not literally from snakes.
Right.
So,
well, it's interesting too with that history, because if you look at the history of the FDA, when they were created in 1937, I believe, one of the reasons one of their statements was that the reason it needed to be created was to prevent snake oil salesmen.
Ironic.
Right. That's ironic, since, Rockefeller was one of the big funders of Big Pharma. And you look at even up to today, Sam, and, Big Pharma is the major donors of every pharmacy school, every medical school. They are still the major donors.
Exactly. And so, it got started with, the Flexner report, right? Because I think it was the Rockefellers or one of the other robber barons back then that funded the Flexner report, and then basically they said they need to standardize rural medicine, and so they need to make it into a big institution,
right?
And so that's when everything went one direction. It went the big oil direction. And
yeah. And it's really interesting because, when you talk about using roots and, flowers and things like that, like we used to years ago before Big Pharma, one of the problems with, still to this day, most medicine is still a derivative of some plant, whether it's the cholesterol medications or whether it's high blood pressure medication. By the way, the ACE inhibitors, this is a good trivia. The ACE inhibitors actually come from some snake venom. I don't remember the snake, but it's actually from snake venom. So we still have snake oil kind of in our medicines today. And you look at, the good example is because one of the first patentable medications was from Bayer Pharmaceuticals with aspirin.
Sure.
And Native Americans and doctors and many different people we used to use, white willow bark, in tinctures and in teas to help for headaches, to help for fevers, and it worked without side effects.
Yeah.
So Bayer aspirin says, Bayer says, okay, we want to isolate the active ingredient in white willow bark so we can help for pain and inflammation and fevers and headaches and such. And so they did that, or they did what they thought they did. But you don't know what you don't know. So you just have to find an ingredient in there and start testing it. Well, they isolated acetylsalicylic acid, which is also known as aspirin. And here's the problem, as people know about aspirin, it causes horrible side effects. It causes gastrointestinal bleeds, and it can cause, stomach irritation and, kidney problems long-term, whereas white willow bark never did that. Now, here's one of the problems when we try to isolate one pharmaceutical from a plant. We only know what we don't know what we don't know. So we try to find that ingredient when in reality, there's probably multiple ingredients in that plant that help it to work synergistically, meaning better without side effects. And there might be other properties in that plant that help to prevent side effects. And that, in my opinion, Sam, we will never, ever figure out in Western medicine. You cannot isolate one active ingredient in a plant without causing side effects. You want to expand on that at all?
Yeah, because patent medicine, because for like you were saying, for thousands of years, like what's the example, like scurvy, right? Scurvy was a plague on the British Navy for hundreds of years.
Right.
You get too far away from land and you didn't have citrus fruit, you had scurvy.
Right.
And so when they talked to I think when they arrived in the New World here, they talked to the Indian people and they said, oh, that's not a problem. We could take some of these leaves or these pine needles and make a tea out of it and drink it and cure your scurvy.
Right. Right.
And even decades after having that information, the British Navy never implemented that easy fix, right? Because it had to be something else. It had to be viral. It had to be some bad spirits on the ship and all sorts of crazy things.
Right. Well, a lot of times we don't want to admit, we're going to get to this later in our podcast, but a lot of times we don't want to admit that, most any disease can be treated with diet and lifestyle modifications, period. So back on Big Pharma, what do you have to talk about? Because you were involved in phase 4 clinical trials, and that's kind of shows the safety of the drug. You hit on that a little bit, but talk a little bit about phase 4 clinical trials.
Yeah, so I think everyone knows about phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials, right? So phase 1 is safety. It's usually a smaller number of people. Well, there's preclinical, right? So preclinical meaning before it goes into the clinics, before it goes into humans. They test it on rodents and things like that, right? To screen the drugs. And so phase 1 is a small human clinical trial. Phase 2 is a little larger, and phase 3, maybe a couple thousand people. But those are the 3 phases of clinical trials that most people know about. But most people do not know about phase 4 clinical trial. Phase 4 clinical trial happens after the drug is approved, right? Then basically it's on the pharmacy shelves, and it's at Costco and Walmart and everything. And then they start collecting data in hundreds of thousands of uses, right? And they collect adverse side effect data. And then when there's enough data, that's when they pull the drug off the shelves. And so we've seen that with Vioxx, a number of years ago. People started having heart attacks, because it didn't pan out because the numbers in the phase 1 and 2, 3 clinical trials were not significant enough.
Just not enough people.
Yeah. Right.
And we saw it with Trovan. We saw it with Posicor, a calcium channel blocker. Trovan was a fluoroquinolone for infections. And here's the one I find most interesting is that, as we all know, maybe we don't, but that's why we have this podcast to educate and empower consumers. One of the most popular classes of drugs today in the United States are statin drugs. You're familiar, right, Sam?
Yes.
Statin drugs to treat high cholesterol. Janet and I both find it interesting that a few years ago, of course, lovastatin was the first one. Lovastatin was isolated from red yeast rice. It is from red yeast rice has been used to support, healthy cardiovascular. To support cardiovascular health for years. So, of course, the drug company wanted to patent something out of it, and they found out lovastatin was one of the things that helped to lower cholesterol. Unfortunately, lovastatin has lots of side effects, like rhabdomyolysis for muscle pain. It breaks your muscle down, and it also has liver side effects. It can elevate liver enzymes, and it can be hepatotoxic, liver toxic. So, once those drugs came to market, we all knew that, but I mean, the drug companies, as they're always good at, is like, okay, this patent's running out. Let's find another one that's just similar to it, and we'll put it on the market. So lo and behold, Baycol comes out. B-A-Y, you guys can look this up, B-A-Y-C-O-L. It was a statin medication, and it was on the market. And once it was on the market, they were doing phase 4 clinical trials on it, and they found out that it was killing people because of its hepatotoxicity, the liver toxicity. So they pulled it off the market. Here's what I find interesting. There's still many other statins on the market. Exactly. My opinion is they are just as dangerous. Yeah. But once they've had a history and they have enough following, no matter how many people it kills, they keep it on the market because there's so much money involved. And that drug company just lobbies the FDA to keep it on the market, period. Do you have any comments about that?
Yeah, exactly. I think one of the things that people don't know about is this number called the NNT, number needed to treat. Okay, so NNT. So you can look at the NNT, the number needed to treat. Let's say if you are preventing 1 case of cardiovascular event, for a statin drug, that NNT number is 104. So you need to treat 104 people to prevent 1 cardiovascular event. And the higher that number is, you're incurring a lot of risk for the 103 people, right? And so these numbers are crazy, and that's what people don't realize is that you're being sold a bill of goods essentially.
Right.
You know?
With the confidence that it's been approved to be
Yes.
healthy for you.
It's certified, it's FDA approved.
Right.
You know.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's one of the problems. That's why I don't like government agencies approving anything, because what it does as consumers, many consumers will wash their hands of their own responsibility and say, well, it's FDA approved, it must be safe and effective. You know, there's right. And I can tell you as a pharmacist, I don't believe that. And there are many doctors, and kind of the question many doctors ask themselves, at least the good doctors, they will say, let's see, would I prescribe this to myself or my family yet? No, it hasn't been on the market long enough. And that says a lot.
Exactly.
You know,
yeah,
so,
it's quite interesting because, you know, I come from a world of chemistry, but I realize that the most difficult thing that you can do in chemistry is simplicity.
Right.
Right. And nature always does the most difficult things in the simplest way.
Right.
True. Yeah.
Well, it's physics, right? It really is. I mean, we didn't really make the law. We kind of name it, but we didn't make the law, but it's pure physics.
Well,
Yeah.
I also would like to interject. I don't believe that medicine before Big Pharma typically did these products indefinitely. Our model is that if you go in and you have high blood pressure, you're on that high blood pressure for life.
Yeah.
So none of the other tools that we have in our toolbox are being used to help that client. Because when you only have 8 minutes, 10 minutes, it's easier to go, here, go fill this, than it is to sit down and tell somebody, hey, you need to lose weight, or you need to do this. And, you know, we need to work on a program to get you there, because that takes some time.
Well, and that's part of the problem, is that, you know, drug companies are in collusion with insurance companies, and insurance companies basically dictate what doctors can prescribe, period. So a lot of patients don't realize it, but they think that when they go into a doctor, that the doctor prescribes the best thing for them. Unfortunately, that's not true all the time, unless you find a doctor, you know, that is, you know, has left the system and doesn't take insurance anymore, which there's a lot of those if you follow our podcast. You know, most doctors will prescribe what your insurance company says is going to be covered, and that is not the best thing for the patient. In fact, usually it's far from, because what happens is that insurance company gives that drug company kickbacks, so they're promoting that drug being prescribed, period. The drug companies and insurance companies are cartels in themselves, and the federal government is an accessory to the crime. They have approved all this stuff, and they make it legal. In any other industry, it would be illegal.
True. I mean, it's a military industrial complex. What we have is a pharmaceutical industrial complex. You know, essentially, because it's captured, right? If you you know, if you're a medical doctor, and you know, I have many friends that are medical doctors, and there's people that go into it with the best of intentions, but what happens is they get caught up in the system. You know, the system is so structured that you have to play the game. You have to, you know, you have standard of care. If someone presents in front of you and has a condition, if you don't follow that standard of care, you could be sued for malpractice.
Right. But, you know, I'm going to interject this, and I've said this many times to my clients. Standard of care does not equate quality of care, ever. And I think that is misleading, because not only is it just the patients, but it's also the providers that have bought into it because their peers are forcing them. If they go off track and say, oh, no, let's go this way, which is not the tier method or the approved method, then their jobs are in jeopardy. Their livelihoods are in jeopardy. And I don't think people realize it. You know, we have friends and colleagues that prefer to practice differently, but they're in big clinics, and if they step over 1 inch, man, they're kicked over too.
Yeah, and that, you know, that creates a lot of bias, right? That creates a lot of coercion, or whatever you want to call it. But there's a invisible force applied to a person and how you conduct yourself. And so when that force is applied, you don't necessarily end up with the best outcome, the best care.
No,
right? And that's why our system today, and now we're talking mandatory vaccines and things like that. Our system is not sustainable. It's at some point it's going to it's going to collapse, in the sense that either the people will get fed up with being on pills forever, or they're it just becomes unaffordable.
Yeah, I think both of them, Sam. Both of those are probably true, and I think you see it happening now. I think there's a revolution in that. I would like to think that people like you and people like myself that are out here educating and empowering individuals, that there's a different way. I'd like to think that we're part of that revolution, and I've seen over the last few years that people are fed up. So I do see it changing. It's going to take some time, and there will always be that one side of medicine, that one side of healthcare. But I want to see people that are proactive in their own health and don't want to be in the sick care system. And I think it's changing. So speaking of changing, so you had an epiphany of why you left Big Pharma, and actually it kind of started with a little bit of an accident, correct?
Yeah. So when I was 38, I had like a midlife crisis type situation. I wasn't happy at work. I used to love going to work, and then all of a sudden in late 30s, I started to hate going to work, and I thought that was kind of odd, because I'm an immigrant kid from Vietnam, so on paper it's fantastic, 6-figure income, pharmaceutical scientist working in cancer research, beautiful wife, wonderful kids, house in the suburbs. I'm like, what is the deal here? And so I wasn't happy, and I was overcome by this feeling of lack of fulfillment. I dreaded enduring going to work for another 20 years. And I dreaded that. And so I started doing a few different things. I became a ski instructor, and then I started skateboarding again with my kids. And on one of those skateboarding trips to a park nearby, I went down this long hill, and I wasn't wearing my helmet, no prevention there. I fell and I cracked my head open. And so I went into a coma. Ooh. And during that coma, I experienced seeing heaven, and the love and acceptance that is heaven, and that completely changed my my outlook on life when I woke up from that, and then that's that precipitated me having a moral crisis, not just a regular midlife crisis. I had a moral crisis with what I was doing at work. And so that precipitated me leaving the industry within 6 months. And everyone thought, is like, did I make a full recovery? Like, are you okay? Are you, did you wake up a few cards short of the full deck there or something like that? Right. And so, but that, and so basically what I do now is I help people have that paradigm shift without paying the full price of a crisis or a tragedy or going into a coma. Because right. I think we're so entrenched in our bias towards Western and modern and complex, that it will take some kind of crisis or some kind of tragedy for us to wake up, because there's nothing else. Logic is not going to wake people up.
Yeah, that's true. I can personally talk about that. I talk about it in my book, actually. My epiphany was, 10 years ago, I was 60 pounds heavier. And I had a lot of chronic diseases, including hypertension, including high cholesterol. My knees hurt. I'm sure I could have found some doctor that would have done surgery on my knees. My feet hurt. I had plantar fasciitis. I'm sure I probably could have found some surgery for that too, or at least anti-inflammatories for the pain. But I decided to change my life and lose weight. And, it changed my life. It literally changed my life, and it changed my family's life, because it also got my family on a healthy lifestyle also. So that it's very personal for me. And that's why one of the reasons I do this podcast is to, like you talk about, make people make that shift into, health and wellness and be proactive in their health.
Yeah. And I think we're all going to get to, especially 2020, right? 2020 has been really, maybe a red pill year for a lot of people, a wake up years that like everything's going crazy. And so you can't help but question, like, what is going on? Like, what's Are we going to have alien landings?
Right? It almost feels that way.
Right. And so it's a good year for people to have that question reality, question the world, right? Because I think we're being told a script. We're being told a story, and it doesn't add up. And so that's what was in my mind. It's like the story didn't add up.
Can you get more specific about that? I'm assuming you're talking specifically about COVID, correct?
Yeah. So, when we're faced with danger as an animal, we don't need a newsletter. We don't need a broadcast to tell us that we feel it. We feel the danger.
Yes.
Like it's intrinsic. It's instinctual. You hear something loud blow up and flames, and you automatically back up and run the other way. There's no way, like if someone's standing there with a loud horn telling you, "Oh, it's safe," it's just pyrotechnics. You're gonna be going the other way anyways. But I see humans right from the get-go. There was this newness. There's this newness to this COVID. It's a novel virus, right?
Right.
It's a brand new virus. We don't know anything about this, right? Well, there's nothing new under the sun. There's just people discovered, the new world, and there's already people here. Sorry to Christopher Columbus, but there's already people here in the new world. And so there's nothing new under the sun. It's just made into awareness. And so I see a lot of this propaganda and a lot of this fear going on around this. And I think more and more people, as the whole year has progressed now, they're realizing that, as they try to resume life and try to do like Thanksgiving and things like that, it's just like, wow, this is actually a control state. It's a police state almost. But people are realizing that there's something amiss here. And it doesn't add up.
Yeah, I like what you have to say about that, because I've been saying it for months that it's not a novel virus. It's kind of like we only know what we know. So when all of a sudden we're looking for something, yeah, we can put a name on it. But it's kind of like going to that plant and finding out what's the active drug in it. We don't know until we look. So now we can name something COVID-19. Does that mean it's only been out since 2019? My thought is I doubt it. Now, you could argue that it was, genetically engineered and it was human made in a Chinese laboratory. I don't know about that, honestly. But here's my point. Our bodies have been fighting viruses like this for thousands and thousands of years. And like you said, it's a great proverb in the Bible. There is nothing new under the sun. It might be under Solomon, I think, under Solomon, Song of Psalms. But either way, it's true. There's nothing, it's nothing new. So, how have our bodies been treating it before? We just have a healthy immune system. I shouldn't say just, that's probably that's the most important part, and lifestyle and eating is very important for that. I love what you said, Sam, is that, if we see something dangerous, we know about it. And think about it. If it was dangerous, the government wouldn't have to tell us, right?
Yeah.
Does the government tell us that an explosion is dangerous? They shouldn't have to. We know it by looking. Like you say, it's instinctual. So really, is it that dangerous if the government tells us? If they have to tell us to wear masks and a social distance, how dangerous is it really? And like you say, there's a lot of traffic on the freeway right now. Yeah, so maybe people will say when there's a pandemic. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, so I think, when the word pandemic is used, right, it's because everyone thinks about 1918 flu pandemic, right, where 10, 15, 20% of the world population decreased. Well, that's just math, and math doesn't lie. So I look at world population growth by year. Every year, the world population grows by 80, 81, 82 million. And so 2020 is going to be the exact same as all the other years. And you're like, what kind of pandemic, makes the world population increase at the same rate? Right.
If it was dangerous, we would know about it. I mean, literally, people would be staying home and everybody would be dying, not just the immunocompromised and the sick. And I get it. There are some people that fall through the cracks that are young and maybe know underlying conditions. Although I would like to see more about those individuals, because in general, they're an exception to the rule. It's mostly the elderly and the immunocompromised. I'm not saying they're not important. They're very important, but this is something that we've been dealing with for hundreds and thousands of years. We should do it the same we have in the past.
Yeah, and in a way, it's a little bit of a sleight of hand, right? Because we know the industry is there to push a pill, a shot, push some kind of human intervention, some kind of new medication, new procedure, or something like that. But
yeah, new vaccine, right?
New vaccine, right? And so that's the business model, right? I mean, if sunlight cured everything, there would be no business.
Right.
Right.
So it's got to be something that nature doesn't make.
Right.
It has to be, because otherwise, if it was something that nature makes, I wouldn't have a business model here. Right.
Janet, you had something to say. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think Tran is hitting on it, because my feeling is that there is a group of population that is always going to be susceptible to infection, and it is serious for them, and we're not denying that. The one thing that I feel that isn't really being told in this scenario, and I'm going to put the media to blame for this, and even just the healthcare industry, our bodies have an immune system.
True.
And if we are healthy and take care of our bodies, we have a great chance of being able to fight it. And I really feel that we haven't given us as a species a chance to say, oh yeah, we fought it very well, and this is what our success is, because all we talk about is cases and deaths. We never talk about the success of it. And to me, that is a little skewed, because there's going to be more people coming out and saying, yeah, I tested positive, but I really wasn't, this or that. And that again is showing you that, their body responded. And I'm not saying that there aren't going to be people who respond terribly to it, but that's true of the flu too. That's true of other infections. And our bodies sometimes, if we're not healthy, can't fight something.
Exactly. And so that's part of the magic show, right? Because there's a bit of a sleight of hand where the language is changed, right? Where basically we're going to address the symptom and not find out what the root cause is, right? We're going to offer a solution, right? Another intervention, as opposed to a lifestyle change, right? So, cardiovascular, cancer, and diabetes are, I think, the top 3 risk factors for COVID, right? So we have to look, okay, well, why is someone in that population, right? Why is that someone in that demographic, right? So I want to share a screen with you guys here.
Please.
So this paper came from the National Institutes of Health, NIH, and it was actually published on the American Diabetes Association. It's called The Paradox of Progress. So as a society, the more that we progress and modernize, we have conveniences, right? Conveniences made by our agriculture, industrial chemicals, pharmaceutical, consumer products, right? And then those are the sources of many man-made chemicals in our society, right? And basically we have exposure to those via going through the skin, transdermal, via breathing, inhalation, and ingestion via our food. And then these chemicals are so small, they actually they actually cross the placenta, so they go from generation to generation, just like Agent Orange back in Vietnam War and things like that. Well, these chemicals do come in and they stick to fatty tissue. Basically, the body will clear what it can, and the rest that is not cleared will be put into fatty tissue for like long-term storage until the body can get rid of it, right? So that's fatty tissue, pancreas, liver, brain, skeletal muscle. So every person is about, unless you're a bodybuilder, every person is about 20% fat, and so, and then once those chemicals come in, they have a pathophysiological effect. They cause obesity, insulin resistance, diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia, by basically mimicking hormones. And so we look at our modern society and the amount of chemicals being made by decade, right? This, if you look here, The blue line is the billions of kilograms of synthetic chemicals made by decade. And so they didn't have data back before World War II, but you could see the blue line increasing here. And so everyone used to have, victory gardens and things like that, and no one had Tupperware. And all of a sudden they came out with Tupperware in the mid 50s because plastic was plentiful. Yep. Oil was plentiful. And then, you see it progressing to 2010 and longer here. But on the red line, you see the percentage of the population that's diabetic. And so when you look at this, you can say that there's a strong correlation. I can't say that there's a causation here. And, basically, none of the scientists will say this causes it. But there's definitely a strong correlation being in a modern world and having modern diseases, right? And so this is something that I think we need to address as far as root cause of what all these risk factors and who's making these risk factors.
Well, we know for a fact that plastics, which do come from the oil industry, are xenophobes, and some of them are xenoestrogens, and which means they mimic estrogens. So they mimic hormones in our body. And that might be one of the reasons we see women that are having hormone issues a lot younger than they used to because of these plastic toxins that have been introduced into our society. Now, I think there's a lot of other things too with those plastics, which with those conveniences, we've had a lot of processed food. You look at that graph, of the diabetes graph, I think it started in the 60s. The first graph started in the 40s, I think. But, really processed foods came about in the 50s, basically post World War II. Exactly. And now when you look at SAD, the standard American diet, most people, that's all they eat. I mean, all their food comes from processed foods. Yeah. And one of the ways I would define processed foods is that if it doesn't rot, then it's a processed food. So,
exactly.
Think about that. So if you're not eating fresh stuff that rots, if it can stay in your, at room temperature or at, even in a fridge or whatever, you could argue that that's not as fresh. And I get it. We've been preserving foods for hundreds of years. I get that. But I still think the fresher, the more raw food you can eat, probably the better for us.
True. And then Shawn and Janet, do you guys see with the red line there what happened in the mid 1990s?
Yeah, put that back up there again, please. So yeah, tell us what happened in the 1990s, Sam.
Yeah, so if you see there was a sudden spike in the prevalence of diabetes, starting in like 94, 95, it looks like. And then, but prior to that, if you see that the blue line, it started going more vertical too, probably in the early 1990s, right? 1991 or so. And so what happened there was GMO, genetically modified foods. And so we started having crops that were genetically modified so they would be resistant to Roundup, right? And so we started spraying the ground, the ground with more chemicals and basically killing off the soil, right? But we'd have better crop yields. And then some of those chemicals, because this is what plants do, plants detox the planet. If you have a Superfund site, plant some grass there, and then basically cut the grass every few weeks, and then basically over time the plants are going to pull those toxins out of the ground.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right, and that's what nature does, right? And so if you're planting soybean or corn onto a field that's been sprayed with Roundup, you're going to have Roundup in your corn and soybeans, right? And then you make Wheaties or you make Cheerios, and then that's how you have Roundup in your Cheerios. And then these chemicals, these Roundup things are actually, they function like an antibiotic, so they actually kill life, right? Because it's killing plants, so it's going to kill animals. It's the same. It's just a slower dose. And so over time, let me pull up this other one. Over time, this is what's causing our health issues, is that we're the apex predator, right? So we are concentrating all these toxins in our body, and it's killing off the bacteria in our gut. and it's leading to autoimmune diseases, food allergies. There's people allergic to pollen every spring. Well, how can you be allergic to something that's on the planet? That you were born here. How could you be allergic to the actual planet itself?
Right.
No,
well, it just like you say, it's because we have toxins in our body that's destroyed our immune system, destroyed our gut health, which is 70% of our immune system is in our gut. So if we don't have a healthy gut and we are ingesting these plants that have toxins in them already, that's going to be a problem.
Yeah. And then, basically we have a lot of inflammation now too, right? Because we have all these compounds are coming in. And so the body will basically detox you, help detox. But if it cannot keep up, you're going to have side effects of toxicity. That's all that we have now, right? So basically, toxins come through our lungs, our skin, our intestinal tract. They all get processed in the liver, and they get excreted on the right-hand side via our skin, kidneys, colon, and lungs. But if the toxins are coming in faster than your body can excrete them, then you're gonna store them basically.
For sure, yeah,
and
for
this
sure.
This is what we're treating, and so Big Pharma is not going to admit to the root cause, and so this is why we have allopathic medicine. We basically treat symptoms, right? And so
treat symptoms instead of fix the problem.
Yeah, instead of addressing the root cause, which is a lot of environmental toxin, right? And so if you're going to be addressing environmental toxin, you're going to be stepping on some big shoes there.
For sure.
So,
so for sure.
This is the problem that we face as a society now, because it's unsustainable. Essentially, it's unsustainable where this is all going.
I agree. We'll talk a little bit more. We'll end the show with how, what's your, thought about how consumers can be proactive in their health. Let's get back to your story about leaving Vietnam. You mentioned in our pre-conference call, you talked about the lockdowns, and mandatory mask wearing are really about control and creating a dependency on the government.
True.
So do you tell us a little bit about your story? Because you're from South Vietnam, correct?
Yes. Yeah. So I grew up in a city in the very southern tip of Vietnam. It's called Cà Mau in Vietnam. So I left there. We left in, I think, 77, 78, somewhere around there. I was 6.5. And so my dad was in the Southern Vietnamese military, right? And so during the Vietnam War, we were allied with the Americans. And so after the fall of Saigon, that's when everyone was kind of like got out of town, got out of Vietnam, right? But we were in the deep South, so we were, somewhat isolated from the communist takeover up in the north, right? And so, but eventually, after a couple of years, they were starting to find out who was in the military, and then who they needed to lock up basically and send to re-education camps. So that's when my father said that we need to hightail it out of here. So let me share something with you guys here. But this was a pivotal document for us to leave Vietnam back in. So it's from the Embassy of the United States. So we had they had this program through the UN where we could immigrate to the U.S. And so you guys can take a look at one of those pictures and see if you can spot me in one of those kids' pictures at the bottom there.
Wow, that's one of those is you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that peak in the middle of my head, right? My not my bangs, but the peak in the hair there, right?
That is you, right? Yeah.
So because of geopolitical issues, and then we can go into the history of Vietnam War and things like that. We came over here as refugees, and so and seeing we wanted to actually come to this country because of the liberty. You know, so that's where I grew up, down in the southern tip of Vietnam. But we settled in Spokane, Washington. So we went from a subtropical place to, like, that first winter was
I'll bet.
So you know, and then this is a picture of my grandma. You know, she's the one that had the stroke when I was a teenager. And so this was, you know, this is the land of opportunity. This is the beacon of light in the world, right? Because of our Constitution, right? That Constitution was written, you know, and when I became a citizen, we had to study the Constitution, right? We had to study the Bill of Rights. I don't know how many people actually know all of that, but we were quizzed on it, right? Because that's part of becoming a citizen. And so we appreciate, like, I think immigrants that come to America appreciate the freedoms that we have here, because we don't have, you know, we don't have the right to criticize government. We don't have the right to criticize any officials over in other countries. You know, it's communist over there. It's like, if you're propagating anti-communist ideals, and then pretty much the next day you're out in the street or you're locked up.
Well, we've had a Cuban immigrant on our podcast before, and he talked basically the same way you're talking, Sam. And so, what are the analogies you see with what our government is mandating now? And when people speak out about, well, I don't necessarily believe the numbers. I don't think it's as dangerous as you say it is. And it seems like these people are being ostracized in the public when they speak out that, you know, this COVID is not as dangerous as they think it is. So what's the analogies of this and you leaving Vietnam?
The analogies, like in a communist country, they would say, oh, this is for the common good. This is for the greater good, right? And that's how it's told to you. It's like, well, you got to take care of everyone. We're all in this together, right? But interesting. It's a slippery slope. And so the same language is being used, whether it's stay home, stay safe. Right, the things that you see on the freeway billboards and stuff like that is, there's an amount of propaganda that went on in those countries. But being in this country, being in the United States, we see that same propaganda. We see the same language. I know it may be hard to understand that, but we live that. That's why immigrants that come from Cuba or some other, socialist or communist country, they see all of this. Right, but America is such a great country because you're allowed to work harder than others. You're allowed to differentiate yourself, right? And in China, it's a communist country, but there's peasants in China and there's people driving Lamborghinis. I'm like, how is that communist?
Right, right.
You've got tech billionaires, and then you've got someone walking behind a water buffalo. That's not communist.
Right.
Exact opposite of communist.
Right.
But,
yeah, everybody's supposed to be equal.
Yeah, people over there, they know it's a story. But I think people here, we're so laxed.
Yeah,
we're so laxed in the defense of our liberty that when the first assault comes, it's not really viewed as an assault on our liberty. It's viewed as, oh, it's for the common good. And that's how you start to lose your rights, is for its common good.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And that's why I love having, people like yourself on the podcast that have fled countries like that, because you can educate our listeners and viewers as to what you've seen in real life, and or at least heard from your parents and grandparents, and what may be happening in our country. And to me, it's all about liberty. And I think people should be able to make their own choices. I think there should be good education out there. I don't think it should necessarily be the government, or it shouldn't be the government at all, period. Because I think if we just look at history, governments cannot be trusted, period. So I think it's people like you and I that can be out there educating people, and then let them decide. Let them decide if they want to stay home, if they want to wear a mask. But, there shouldn't be government mandates about this kind of stuff, in my opinion.
So true. Yeah. It's very strange to see, people, the cognitive dissonance is so strong this year. You see people that are so fearful, and they're wondering if they should take this vaccine. And then the next moment they're going, hey, I'm going to Costco. Do you need me to pick up anything? And you're like, wait a minute.
Right.
This thing was deadly.
Right.
Or you're wearing your gloves everywhere you go.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
I tell people, like, if this was deadly and a mask really worked, you wouldn't have to tell me to wear a mask. I would steal the mask off your face.
Right. Right. That's
wear.
correct. Right. People will decide that. Like you say, it's instinctual.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about, because we're all about solutions on this podcast, not just complaining about problems, but we're all about solutions. So what is the solution to all these healthcare issues, including COVID? It sounds like to me you believe in being proactive with health. So tell us what your solution is.
So my solution is I'm going to address the biggest component of your body. The biggest component of your body is water. A 100-pound person is about 75 pounds water. And unfortunately, that water is a commodity today. A lot of people are drinking bottled water because they know tap water has a bunch of toxins in it, right? And so water, water is a human right, but more and more it's become a commodity. And so it's polluted with, plastics, phthalates, all sorts of things in bottled water, right? So my solution is simplicity. I was introduced to a technology from Japan, and I shifted away from studying sick people to studying healthy people. What do the healthy people do? And just copy them, just flat out copy the healthy people, right? They grow their own food, they have clean sources of water, they have clean air, and they have social systems. They're social, we're all social animals, right? And so you can just restore those fundamentals, food, water, air, and shelter, right, in a social structure, then we're going to have good long health, right? Not this system that we've created with a lot of dependency on forever chemicals, right? And so basically, I teach a lot of people that all those that funnel of chemicals coming into our body, that's unavoidable. That's in the system. And so what I teach people now is how to drink this. They call it electrolyzed reduced water. It's a medical grade water that you drink and then you detox your body, right? And so at first I thought it was like some kind of hippie spiritual talk or whatever it is, but I found enough research papers on PubMed, and I've seen enough cases that now I've dedicated my life to just sharing the truth of water to people.
Good for you. That's awesome, Sam. That's why we like to have people like yourself on our podcast. So thank you for listening and tuning in today. And Sam, if anybody wants to get a hold of you, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah. So my website is one as an ONE, onetruehealth.life. And then you can also find me on Facebook as for now until I jump off to some other platform. But you look me up Sam Tran and then search Sam Tran in Seattle. And then you'll message me on there, and then basically I travel the world and share water with people. I know a lot of people that drink water.
That's right. We all do, right? I love it. And I want to share in my book. So it's a 6-step solution on how to fix healthcare, and part of that, most of it is your health. So personally, it's up to you. You will be the hero. You, the listener, you, the viewer, are the hero. And in the 6-step solution, number 1 is be proactive in your own health. True. And that is instrumental in solving our healthcare crisis. Because once people can realize that they're in charge of their own health, then there's going to be a paradigm shift in our nation when it comes to healthcare, because it'll be truly, it won't be sick care anymore, because that's what we have, is a sick care system. So I don't want to give away the 5 other steps, but that's the first step. You have to download my book on Amazon, Sickened, How the Government Ruined Healthcare and How to Fix It, in order to find the other steps. And I would appreciate you doing that. So you've been listening to Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham. Tune in Thursday, 10 a.m. Pacific time. We will have Dr. Garnita on. She is a rheumatologist. She specializes in rheumatology, obviously, which is autoimmune diseases like lupus, like rheumatoid arthritis. Lots of different inflammatory diseases is kind of what we've been talking about today, because she'll be talking about non-drug treatments, which include exercise, sleep, and diet modifications, and vitamin D. We didn't talk about today. We did talk about sunlight, though. So tune in for that, because you will find out a lot of non-traditional treatments for autoimmune type diseases. Thursday, 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thank you for tuning in today. You've been listening to Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham.